Minnesota, Maine. Two different states, but with plenty of similarities when it comes to Medicaid fraud.
Whistleblower is now accusing a contractor in Maine of defrauding taxpayers out of millions of dollars over the course of 7 years. The business at the center of the allegations, founded by a Somali American, drawing comparisons perhaps to the scandal that has rocked the state of Minnesota.
The media here in Maine ignored this story. We're looking into organizations that have suspicious billing patterns within the Maine Care program, that when we find clusters of these, for example, home care LLCs at a given address, and we go knock on the doors and nobody's home, two weeks in a row, nobody is home during normal business hours.
So we've been going into all types of fraud from across the country. We talked about Minnesota, we talked about Ohio, we talked about Washington. We're talking about the Medicaid fraud, the nonprofit abuse. We also talked about how taxpayer money is being used, basically drained through the same type of programs. And now we're going to talk about Maine. Not because it's new. We've been talking about Maine probably before the Nick Shirley video based on some of the Somali fraud, but now we're starting to see some real connections. The same strategy that we saw exposed in Minnesota, we're seeing it again. The same types of organizations, the same Medicaid loopholes, the same lack of oversight, is just a different state. And independent investigators and whistleblowers are uncovering some serious allegations that point to organized fraud. We're seeing the same playbook show up state after state. This is a national problem. We're going to be checking out a clip from an interview from an independent investigator that is down in Maine, breaking all of this down. Let's get into it.
Maine. Two different states, but with plenty of similarities when it comes to Medicaid fraud. The independent journalist who's been pointing out the incredible similarities and sounding the alarm joins us next. Steve Robinson is my guest. He is the editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. Steve, so good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me on, Liz.
And Alpha News has been covering fraud in Minnesota. You have been covering fraud in Maine. The many similarities that we've been reporting on for years now, the explosive growth in Medicaid programs, the amount of spending, the lack of oversight, the politicians involved in all of it. So what is your perspective, how this is all playing out based on the work that you've done in Maine, Steve?
I find the similarities and the differences remarkable, but the way that the programs are being systematically exploited by very committed groups of actors who appear to have connections to foreign countries, or at least foreign political factions, is eerily similar. And we find time and time again when we're looking into organizations that have suspicious billing patterns within the Maine Care program, that when we find clusters of these, for example, home care LLCs at a given address, and we go knock on the doors and nobody's home, two weeks in a row, nobody is home during normal business hours, and it appears that there's nobody at home in the entire commercial office building. So we find these connections all the time. And it leads me to believe that we're not dealing with, as the national media has suggested, a separate and discrete scandal under Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota, and a separate and discrete scandal in Maine under Governor Janet Mills. These are really the same thing. They're different parts of the elephant, so to speak, but it's one organization that I believe is backed by nation-state level actors. I think the government of Somalia is backing this as a nation-building project to increase the flow of remittance money into the country.
Simple as that. It looks like that's what's happening, that really powerful people are greenlighting this fraud to happen to help build the country of Somalia. And if you've been watching a lot of these types of videos talking about some of the Somali fraud, you would notice when you go on YouTube, you will go in the algorithm and they will start recommending videos in general about Somalia and the issues they have. And when you look at the issues in that country, it's total chaos. So lots of money is being pumped in there, taxpayer money, and I don't think it's even doing anything to fix the situation in Somalia. Somalia is a complete mess.
It certainly seems the evidence is all there pointing to just that. In Minnesota, we suffered fraud at a massive scale with the $250 million Feeding Our Future scandal. In so many ways, accountability has been avoided, though. In Maine, you had 78 people indicted with the Feeding Our Future case in Minnesota. But what can you tell us about Gateway Community Services? I know you've done work on this for quite a while. I noticed that the mainstream media in Maine seems to be picking up on a lot of your work, but this is a nonprofit there where you are that's currently now under federal investigation.
Yeah, we first started writing about Gateway Community Services, which was a nonprofit and an LLC, but primarily an LLC. That was founded by a Somali American refugee, Abdullahi Ali, in 2013. and grew into a big, like $5 million a year migrant services agency. We first started reporting on it back in March. And what drew our attention to it was the high level of connections with the Maine Democratic Party, but also the fact that this LLC and the nonprofit were getting no-bid contracts from the Mills administration to engage in activities that very closely mirrored, basically were identical to political canvassing. And when we dug a little further, we discovered that Abdullahi Ali, the CEO, was in fact running for president of Jubaland, Somalia, the semi-autonomous region of southern Somalia. So at the same time, he's receiving $5 million a year, roughly, in Maine Care money, millions of dollars in no-bid contracts, close to $700,000 in a PPP loan, and likely some forms of government money through partnerships and arrangements we don't even know about or haven't discovered yet. At the same time this money is flowing to him, he's running for an office in a foreign state and is doing Somali language media interviews in which he's bragging about personally bankrolling a paramilitary organization that he is going to use to depose the sitting president, Madobe, in Jubaland.
First reported by the Maine Wire back in March, Abdullahi Ali posted to his own presidential media page this interview. We had it translated. Here's what he said.
When I was away and abroad, the financial contributions I was sending back were being used to support the forces for buying bullets, ammunition, and food.
Last week, Abdullahi Ali posted this on X. I make no apologies for building a successful business in Maine, working hard to earn a living, earning my PhD, giving back to my Maine community, and running for office in Jubaland. I am proud to contribute my hard-earned dollars to support my people back home. Now, we reached out to Ali for comment multiple times. We even came to Gateway to try and speak with him. Hello, I'm with News Nation. My name is... No comment?
So taxpayer money is being used for regime building in Somalia. This is not just a fraud story, but again, it's becoming a real connections story. What's being alleged here isn't just stolen money. It's the taxpayer dollars, no bid contracts, which is always a bad thing. Governments should always have bid contracts so companies can compete and the government can get the best deal possible. When you see no bid contracts, usually what's happening is money and resources are being exchanged under the table. So we see all this going on. We see the political organizing all ending up operating in the same place. And we've seen this before. We've seen the same strategy that we've been tracking in Minnesota. Government money is flowing through nonprofits. There is no oversight. It's on purpose. And these organizations are growing really fast. And then suddenly the same groups are deeply involved in political activity in this country and in Somalia. So helping people vote is not the issue. Immigration is not the issue. Political parties are not the issue. The issue is public money, your tax dollars crossing into political influence, even if it's indirectly. Because when this whole situation becomes blurry and confusing, there is no accountability. Again, when you hear no bid contracts, that should immediately raise eyebrows. There's no competition, there's no transparency, there's no real guardrails. So if you add elections into the mix, now you've created incentives that shouldn't exist in a healthy system. We see the same structure keep showing up in Minnesota, then Ohio, then Washington. We see what's going on in Maine. At some point, we have to stop calling this a coincidence. This is how large-scale fraud hides. Not in necessary dramatic crimes, but in boring systems no one wants to audit too closely, especially if you don't want to be labeled racist.
We thought this was just remarkable. As a Maine reporter, I never thought that I would need to know, the internal politics of Jubaland, Somalia. But here we are. We reported on that, and weeks later, a whistleblower who was a former employee came to our attention and said that he'd been fired for raising concerns at the company after looking at our reporting. And he handled accounting for them for 5.5 years, submitting Medicaid billing. And the story that he told us was a story of systematic exploitation of the personal support services program under Maine Care that allowed for this organization to basically invent services and get paid for services that were never rendered. That was the story that he told. And it's the story that he told, by the way, Liz, a year before he even knew who I was, a year before I talked with him. He sent an email to the Department of Homeland Security under Joe Biden. He sent an email to the Office of State Auditor here in the state of Maine, making these allegations, and no one ever replied to him. As he was a genuine whistleblower, no one ever responded to him, and that's why he ended up going to the media. He was audited by the state of Maine in retaliation for coming forward and speaking to me, by the way.
A whistleblower tells News Nation that taxpayers have been bilked out of millions of dollars from Maine's Medicaid program. And he says when he tried to bring it to light, he was fired.
Chris Bernardini spent 7 years working for Gateway Community Services, a Somali American-led health services contractor in Maine. Bernardini alleges Gateway oversaw a system in which false records were filed about client visits. And he says they charged taxpayers for providing services that were never performed.
We started getting some clients calling and saying, months later that their client owed them hours. They hadn't come in for these shifts and stuff. But I had a time card for it.
And they were billing for it.
They were billing for it.
Isn't that something? This is what whistleblowers were worried about back in Minnesota. That if you brought this up, when you talk about this, when you bring these situations up, these allegations, they will try to make your life miserable. I've never been audited before, but I know for those who have been audited, it's basically a financial colonoscopy. They're digging deep to find something wrong. They want you to look like a criminal. Just because you're bringing up fraud, potential fraud, you're saying, hey, I'm looking at the numbers here, something doesn't make sense. And this is how Maine is responding. So we're looking at the same tactics being used in Minnesota as happening in Maine.
Unreal. The developments and the timing really match up here, Steve. Medicaid expanded tremendously during the Obama administration. You spoke about that a bit. It took about until 2019 or so to hit Maine. But now we're seeing suspected fraud, all kinds of Medicaid programs. So this is where we also see the similarities. Daycare programs, housing programs, non-emergency transportation programs. All seems to be the same playbook.
Yeah, the interesting thing is everybody is coming to me and saying, hey, are you looking for the daycare facilities in Maine? Where are all the daycare facilities? Well, we have a similar program with a similar acronym, but what we really have is a blossoming of personal support services. So under our Maine Care rules, you can be paid for providing assistance with the tasks of daily living. So these could be shopping for groceries, cleaning your house, bathing, very basic things. And if you get qualified for that, if you get on Medicaid and you're qualified for that, you can get these services from a company like Gateway. And there's a huge expansion of the number of people who are qualified for these services, and each one of them becomes a meal ticket for these LLCs that provide home-based services. Because if you get one of those people as your clients, you're tapping into funding from Maine Care, guaranteed funding from Maine Care. And it's an open question as to whether these services are actually being provided because of the level of manipulation that's allowed on the electrical verification system. But this system, which was meant for accountability, allows the administrator of this company to log into the back end and, just as easy as typing numbers into an Excel spreadsheet, invent fake service hours provided and then send it to the state of Maine. The state of Maine automatically pays it. And only later, maybe 2 years later, will they look back, audit a batch of those claims. And if they see something that's fishy, then they'll start to dig a little bit deeper. But
you see how this works in terms of taxpayer money, and especially how some of these governments just throw it out. You can tell they don't really care about your money because it's not their money. We would never do this for any other of our services if it came to our own money. The governor, Janet Mills, if she had something that she needed to be done, a service being done, she wouldn't just blankly throw money at the situation and never check to see if the job was taken care of. But see, when it comes to taxpayer money, they don't care. It's not their money, it's your money. So they could just write off checks, the things that doesn't even exist, that never even happened before.
You can go and bill the state of Maine up to $1 million, be audited, and then they'll turn off the spigot eventually when you can't show any documentation for any of the services you claim to have provided. But there's never any criminal charges. You don't pay the money back. You just abandon the business and you can go start another Maine Care business. And we have evidence of that happening. We have public records showing the same exact people abandoning businesses during an audit, starting new ones, and they continue to bill over millions of dollars to the Maine Care system.
Whenever there are credible accusations, political deflections seem to follow. Here in Minnesota, you are a racist or Islamophobe, according to politicians and the complicit mainstream media in Minnesota. And that's even if you're just stating the obvious, which is here that 90% of those charged with fraud these last few years in these Medicaid schemes are Somali. What's the situation like there in Maine with all of this regarding the facts about fraud and what seems to be deflection by design?
Well, the media here in Maine ignored this story. Again, I first started reporting on Gateway in March, and again, it reported the whistleblower allegations in May. And the media in Maine did not report on any of this until 2 weeks after it was a national firestorm. And of course, your reporting was emerging in Minnesota, and Minnesota was capturing headlines. So it took a full 2 weeks of the national media hounding this story. I mean, I think we might have had a House oversight investigation before the Bangor Daily News or the Portland Press Herald even noticed this story. So they were very diligently, adamantly, almost straining their necks to look away from this story. And it's all for the same reasons that you just mentioned. They're afraid, they're scared to do any reporting that's critical of a Somali person is somehow racist and bad. No one's condemning or standing up for the Maine Wire's press freedom or our right to access public records in the way that they would for any other outlet in the state of Maine. It's very, very bizarre the way the mainstream outlets have handled this, both in Minnesota and here in Maine.
That's why we have so much chaos happening in Minnesota. There were people reporting on this for years and was ignored. They weren't even sitting there making viral videos about checking in and arguing with Somalis about what's going on in daycare. They were reporting this, just like we talked about with a story a few years ago. There was a man investigating this and he was fired. This is the issue, that the people in charge didn't take care of this problem. It ballooned into this disaster. And now, when there's so much attention to it, it's all over the place. It's chaos. There's riots happening in Minnesota. If the people in charge took care of this problem, we would not be here.
Presente, the New Mainer Health Initiative, all these nice sounding left-wing organizations to create what were called community health outreach workers. CHOWs is what they called them. You didn't need it to be a nurse. You didn't need to be a doctor. You didn't need to have any credentials to be a community health outreach worker. All you needed to be was someone who could speak Lingala, Portuguese, Somali Bantu, a migrant who could go door to door and literally buy groceries for migrant households, sign them up for EBT cards, sign them up for general assistance, which is a form of municipal welfare reimbursed by the state of Maine, and sign them up for Maine Care. It says in the contract documents that we've published and we've reported on at length that they were empowered with federal COVID money provided from Joe Biden to buy groceries for these households. Now, under federal law, if you sign someone up for a benefits program like SNAP, also known as food stamps, or TAMF, or Medicaid, which in Maine we call Maine Care, you're required to provide them assistance to register to vote.
There was a lot of money being overbilled. There was multiple years of violations, formal notices being issued, businesses closing and then reopening with the same people. I mean, what's going on here? No criminal charges in Maine, no arrests, no public consequences. It's just administrative language and then silence. We keep saying the same thing over and over again. And Minnesota, audits flagged problems years before Feeding Our Future scandal exploded. Warnings were issued. Red flags were raised high in the air. And nothing meaningful happened until the damage was so ridiculously massive, you see what's going on. That's why people are frustrated. That's why people are visiting daycares and other facilities. It's not that fraud exists. Fraud would always exist. It's just that early warnings kept being ignored. Audits are designed to stop the bleeding if there's something going wrong. Instead, they're being treated like it's just some inconvenience. So when bad actors, scammers, learn that the worst case scenario is, well, maybe you'll pay some back later, whatever, the system becomes an open invitation for fraud. They'll just open another business. If you rob a bank, there's cameras, alarms, police, and consequences. But if you exploit a government program, you get audits maybe years later. The money is probably spent. The money is probably gone out of this country. That is a problem because what we're seeing across these places, Minnesota, Ohio, Washington, and Maine, is the same lesson being learned over and over again. The risk is low and the reward is high. And enforcement is extremely slow or non-existent. This is not an accident. This is what happens when systems are designed around basically hiding things instead of verification. And listen closely to what's not happening here. Officials are being asked direct questions. Government offices are being contacted. Departments are being pressed. And we see the usual thing, no comment. It's an ongoing process. referred to somewhere else, that silence creates a vacuum, and that's why we need independent investigators. We need whistleblowers. We need journalists out there doing the real work, not because they want to, because no one else is doing it. That's why these stories keep breaking outside the mainstream first. The system resists looking at itself. And I'm gonna keep repeating this in every single video. Every single dollar stolen is a dollar that doesn't help people who need help. It doesn't help fund hospitals, and it definitely doesn't strengthen the public trust with the government. That's why Maine isn't just another state in this story, is another problem. So let's zoom out here. Minnesota wasn't an accident. Maine is definitely not an outlier. And this isn't about one group or even one state. This is about a system that keeps getting exploited in the same way over and over again because no one decided to close the loopholes. They don't have any oversight. It's fast money with no real consequences. And until this changes, this will continue to happen quietly at massive cost to the American people. Taxpayer money isn't infinite, and people trusting in the system is not infinite either. We're going to keep following this, we're going to keep connecting the dots, and we're not going to stop here. When you really think about what's going on right now, there's tons of channels that's talking about the shooting with the woman in Minnesota, talking about the ICE situation, going back and forth between what is legal, what is not. In this channel, we're going to focus on fraud. There's plenty of channels already talking about if the ICE officer is guilty or not. You can find that type of content anywhere. But in this channel, we're going to focus on the fraud because I think that's what the powerful people are trying to gloss over. They don't want you to talk about the fraud. They kind of want you to speak about how aggressive the ICE agents are or the border control situation, what's going on with the back and forth between Trump and these other politicians. We're going to focus on fraud on this channel. And if you agree with me, hit the like, subscribe to this channel while we continue to dive deep and give light and platform to these independent investigators, to the whistleblowers that are actually trying to expose the real problem. But let me know what you guys think about this story in the comments below. Thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.